Okay, so fine, title slide. Hello, everyone. Shall we go? Are we ready? Let's roll. Okay, so what about a desktop app? I am Sebastiano. I work at JetBrains. No, I do not work on Compose, so I'm sorry I don't have any more info than you have about that. This is what I have come up after playing with it myself, so don't expect anything that you probably wouldn't find elsewhere. But this is an introduction. I want to help people that have played with Jetpack Compose on Android understand how easy it can be for them to create a desktop application. So the idea behind Compose for Desktop is that you can just take whatever knowledge you have about creating a UI on Android, because I assume most of you that are here probably already know about Jetpack Compose. If you don't, you probably want to catch up on that. I'm not going to go into details, but that's the future. So go for it. We will start by setting some expectations here. It's very important to understand the basic concept is that UI done on desktop with Compose works in pretty much the same way that it does on Android with Jetpack Compose. It's the same idea, but you have a slightly different mindset when it comes to desktop applications compared to mobile applications. There are some desktop-only things and concepts that don't really apply to Android, and there are many Android concepts that don't apply to desktop at all. There are some notable differences between desktop and Android, and the first one that comes to my mind is that lifecycle actually is easy on desktop. It's either running or not running. There is also something that you don't really get on Android, which is you don't have to deal with the window Chrome, which is the border of the window. You don't have to deal with menu bars. On macOS, they are the thing at the top of the screen. On the other operating systems, they are usually inside of the window. And also, you have the concept of tray icons. Tray icons are something that is similar in a way to a foreground service notification on Android. That's the generic idea, although you definitely don't need one to keep stuff running in the background. There are definitely less restrictions on desktop that you have on mobile, mostly because there is a different power envelope. There are no problems with the file system access, no scope storage. There are no permissions in most cases, at least not at the level that Compose is concerned about. There are permissions on some operating systems for things like location and so on, but that's outside of the scope of what we'll be talking today. And some things, when you're doing Compose, just like on Android, sometimes you need to go outside of Compose and deal with the older APIs and wrap things from the previous way of doing things. It's the same thing on desktop. On desktop, that generally means touching Swing APIs or doing platform invocation, so using native operating system APIs using JNI. Again, that's outside of the scope of what we're going to be covering today. Now, you might be wondering, okay, Compose, desktop, cool. What can I do with it? Well, at JetBrains, we have one app that is called Toolbox that is super nice. Strongly recommend using that. It's free, and it keeps your IDEs up to date without having to care about that. You just, next day, turn on the computer, IDEs up to date, cool. And that's entirely done in Compose. It used to be done as an Electron app, but this year it has been rewritten, and it's now much faster. It uses a lot less RAM, which is not bad. And there are also applications from the community already. One example that might be useful for people in this room is Staxi, which is an application done by the Apache 64. You can find the sources on GitHub, and it shows you which libraries are used in a given APK or application from the Play Store. Those are the URLs if you are curious about them, but don't worry about the URLs. It's fine. Remember that this stuff is in beta. It's just become beta very recently. So expect things to be sort of fine. There might still be rough edges, things that are missing. It is built upon Jetpack Compose, which is stable, and it's a very stable platform to work upon. But some things might not work as expected, and I mean, it's beta for a reason. So let's say I have convinced you, and you want to get started. So how do you do that? Well, there is one place that I would recommend looking at, and it is the repository on GitHub where the sources for desktop, for Compose for Desktop are. Has to be said, there you will also find the sources for Compose for Web, which is an entirely separate thing. It lives in the same repository, and it uses Kotlin multi-platform, but it's a very different beast. So we're not going to be talking about that today, also because I don't know anything about it. But before we go on, 1 second. Do not waste time writing down URLs except this one. There is a small website where you have all the links of everything that we're going to go through today, issues, tutorials, references, everything. So just take that one down and look out for the link symbol. Everything that has one of those next to it will have a link on the website. Cool. So for what concerns IDE support, after all, JetBrains, right? Well, there is the Compose multi-platform plugin. It is also, as I said, supporting Compose for Web, and it is available for Android Studio and IntelliJ IDEA. The tooling is lagging behind what you have for Jetpack Compose in Android Studio. That is kind of justifiable, I guess, because it's a much more recent endeavor. What you do get for now are previews for your composables, but you don't get things like interactive preview, and you don't get very nice things that you get in Android Studio, such as the animation inspector. And there are some small things here and there that Studio does for you as quality of life things that you don't get yet. I hope they will be there soon, but again, don't ask me why, because I don't know. In terms of things that you probably already know about Compose, there are the core Compose libraries. They are the same. There is the Compose runtime, there is the foundation, there is UI, and there is material, which at this point, hopefully at least you know how to use. They are the same packages and the same API names as you get on Android, which is convenient because it makes your life a lot easier. On the other hand, it's a bit weird to see Android X on desktop code, but there is also the same concept of a compiler plugin for the Kotlin compiler, which, in case it wasn't clear, it means that you need to use Kotlin. You cannot use Java for that. It's kind of like a duh, but worth pointing out. What is that is different, though? So we've seen so far, there's a lot of commonalities, there's a lot of things that work the same way, but there are also things that work in a different way, because as I said, desktop is a different platform than what mobile is. And the first thing that comes to mind are there are some Android-only APIs that, for very obvious reasons, will not be available on desktop. For example, if you're used to using the Android SDK APIs, you should notice that there is no access to anything outside of those packages, which are the Kotlin standard library, the Java standard library, and the Compose things that are from the 4 packages that I mentioned earlier. There is also, again, no concept of permission, no concept of runtime permission either. And very obviously, Android-only stuff will not work on desktop. It will not compile, most likely, on desktop. So things like architecture components, things like other Jetpack libraries, some of them at least, will not work. Firebase will not work. And there are other things as well. We'll go a bit more into detail into that later. When it also comes to old school Android UI, so the views framework, well, you don't have those. You don't have Android, you don't have views, which means that there is no such thing as a map view. And there is no such thing as a web view. Or I should say, there is something, but it's not in a great state. It's something that requires a lot of work because you need to embed a like Chromium framework inside of a Swing application, or a Compose application is not easy. There is something, but it kind of doesn't really work well. And just like on Android, you can interoperate with the old school UI, with the views, you can do exactly the same thing on Compose for Desktop. So you have things like interaction with Swing, which is the old school Java UI framework. And in fact, Compose runs inside of a Swing window just as much as Compose on Android works inside of an activity most of the time, or all the time maybe. And the other way around, you can host Swing components inside of your composition just the same way you can have views inside of composables on Android. There are also no activities, there's no fragments. You do have, as I said, a different lifecycle. It's much easier. The window is open, the window is closed. And when I talk about windows, again, I'm talking about Swing windows. You don't generally have to care about that. It's all wrapped in a Compose-friendly API for you. But there might be cases where you need to do something a bit more special, and you want to have access to the Swing stuff underneath. So that's a whole different scenario. For what concerns resources, resources on desktop work in a very different way from what they do on Android. You have to use the Java resource system, which is euphemistically saying limited. There are no buckets. There is no concept of configuration. There is no idea of orientation because, I mean, what are you going to do? Just put the computer this way? No. There is no idea of display size, so you cannot do that automatically just putting things in a certain folder. That doesn't mean you cannot do it at all. You have to write the logic to do that. And also, right now, there is no internationalization built in yet. I think they're working on it, but I'm not sure about this. And there is no support for right-to-left languages, which is also something that is tracked. There's an issue that I've linked on the website about that, so you can keep an eye on that. If that's a priority for you, just be aware. If you, like me, like GIFs, sorry, there is no support for that yet. And there is no support for animated vector drawables. But there is support for non-animated vector drawables. There is one caveat to that, which is in your vector drawables, you can reference resources such as colors and things like that, paths. If you do that, they will not work on desktop for the very obvious reasons of there is no resource system to load that stuff from. So just you need to hard code everything into the vector drawable, and it will work just fine. Also, not really related to resources, but maybe someone was wondering, Lottie does not work yet, mostly because the Android implementation of Lottie is very tied to the Android platform, and they aren't planning to support Compose for Desktop yet. Maybe there's some way that the Compose for Desktop team will be able to use the so-called Scotty, which is a Lottie runtime built into Skia, which is the graphics runtime that Android, Chrome, and Compose for Desktop, and Flutter, and whatever else use. So we might get Lottie support at some point, not yet. For what concerns accessibility, the APIs are there because they're the same ones that you get on Android, but they're not really hooked up yet. The semantic stuff still works the same way, and it's still useful for UI testing, but it's not really implemented yet. It's a work in progress. It's something that they're working on right now. I think it should be there for version 1.0. The current state, though, is that they have something that works on macOS most of the time, and the other operating systems will come after that. Again, hopefully for 1.0, but I don't know. In terms of UI testing, now that I mentioned it, well, the UI testing story is not very different for what concerns the UI testing itself. It's mostly the same. You use the same APIs, and it is much faster than running UI tests on Android because you don't have to push an APK or two APKs through ADB to a device and then spin them up. It just runs locally, so it's much, much faster. And that's kind of like maybe you're getting the idea of, oh, maybe I can write my composables in a way that is platform agnostic and run them for tests on desktop. That will be much faster. So that's technically possible. I haven't tried it, but it is technically possible. Just like on Android, you use create compose rule and then use, again, the same APIs that you would use on Android. There are also some additional APIs to handle things that don't exist on Android, such as the scrolling with the mouse and things like that. Yeah, that's a fun idea I was mentioning earlier. The problem is that it might be complicated to run UI tests on a CI, but at least locally, you should be able to run them easily on Compose for Desktop. That is, assuming your composables don't interact with Android-specific things. For what concerns screenshot testing, the situation is a bit different. There is something there. You might want to look up the test compose window. There is a desktop implementation for that kind of works. It mostly works. There is a work in progress implementation of new APIs. There's a change list open on Gerrit, and they're working on that with the idea to bring things like animation APIs to be able to take screenshots midway and stuff like that. I don't think that works yet, but I haven't used screenshot testing on desktop yet, so I'm not sure. For what concerns things that are unique to desktop, though, there's a lot. Again, I think this is very important to stress. Desktop is a very different beast from mobile. And because there are different needs, there are also different features and different needs. The main thing that I haven't covered yet is windowing. I mentioned that you have to deal with the window that has a border, whatever. The system takes care of that, but you might also have an application that has multiple windows at the same time. That's perfectly fine. So you can have something that has 2 windows. You can have pop-ups. You can have models. You can have any kind of UI you want, really. And those windows are so-called J-frames. That's the name the swing gives to a window. You mostly don't have to deal with that, luckily enough. Then there is support for keyboards, mechanical keyboards in particular. Well, physical keyboards, sorry. There are things that you normally don't get on Android, such as keyboard shortcuts. So for example, you might have an interceptor at the window level where if you just type something, it will get the key presses for you. You also have something that is there on Android, but not very much used, which is tooltips. So a tooltip is something that when you put the mouse on top of a composable, it will show a small thing which you have complete control over. In this case, it's just a surface with a text inside. But it can literally be anything you want. And also, as I mentioned before, there's menus, there's tray icons, and also notifications. Notifications on desktop are different from what they are on mobile. The use case is slightly different, and the appearance depends a lot on the operating system that you are working on. On macOS, they will show up like that, maybe with a less terrible icon than that one. But that's what you get by default if you don't put too much work into it, because you're almost about to go on stage. There are also the idea that you don't have APKs because desktop OSs don't deal with APKs. So you have installers, you have the DMG on macOS, you have the MSI on Windows, you have whatever the Linux flavor you're using uses. There are also some very important output optimization tips in the link for the native installers. So on the Compose repository, I strongly recommend, if you want to distribute something, to read that stuff, because just like on Android, you don't want to have an installer that is 300 megs to show one window. We're not doing Electron. And for macOS specifically, there's the issue of notarization. We'll get to that in a second. But just so that you know, essentially it's about signing your applications before you distribute them. Now, Someone's going to hate me for this. There are scroll bars on desktop, which, yes, Compose on Android still doesn't have those, but you do have them on desktop because they're very important for users to be able to tell how big something is and if there's a list. And so there are desktop-specific APIs for that right now. And those work, it's a very simple thing, is you essentially put a box and you put your scrollable container and your scroll bar inside of that box, and you join them together with an adapter. I say adapter, I know people have PTSD from Recycler View. That's not the kind of adapter. It's just one line. And yeah, you can use them with lazy row, lazy column, anything that has a scrollable modifier. So it's very easy. And it looks like a scroll bar does. Next up, you have mouse events, which you don't really get on Android. So you have things like pointer movement, and you can tell when something has the pointer on top of it, because maybe you have more yellow on your UI. I don't know. I do. There are modifier keys and mouse buttons, other concepts that kind of exist on Android, but don't really exist on Android. So there is some specific APIs for that. And there are some desktop-only things that you don't really need on Android as much. The main one for me is the split panel. Now, what is a split panel? A split panel is one of those things that has a line, and you can drag it left and right or up and down, and it will resize that part of the window for you. If you've used an IDE, which you probably have, you know how that works. There's also an experimental video player. There is the aforementioned kind of not working web view thing, which hopefully at some point will be working properly. And if you want to make games on desktop, there is a LWJGL, which is a Java-based game engine integration. There's an example on how to drive that from Compose, which is fun. Again, those three are experimental. Your mileage might vary very, very much. Now, I mentioned earlier, libraries, right? Okay, so I'm thinking about libraries. Well, this is JVM, so there's a lot of stuff for JVM on the desktop because JVM has been around forever. There's a lot of things that you can use that might not work on Android that do work on desktop. Some might be direct replacements for things that you would normally get on Android, such as Jetpack components. Others are not. There are also a lot of Android libraries that makes no sense on desktop. And let's be honest, most don't, because they are mapping Android-specific problems. They're solving Android-specific problems that don't really exist on desktop. You can use some of the accompanied libraries. Not to convince Chris. Some of them might work. I haven't tried them. I'm thinking mostly about pager, placeholders, flow layout, and swipe to refresh, although I'm not sure why you would want that unless you're building an application for a desktop operating system that supports touch, which is not macOS. There is no Play services. Sorry, there's no Firebase. But you can use the Java clients for some of those, and you can use the REST APIs for some of those. Again, not all the things that you get from Play services and not all the things that you get from Firebase will make sense on desktop. There are no architecture components, because those are very tied to the Android SDK. So there is no view model, there is no navigation, there is no room, there is no hilt. So what do you do? Well, there are alternatives. For example, for navigation, there is a Kotlin multi-platform library that is called Decompose that supports desktop. I think it supports JavaScript. So you can use it if you have a Kotlin multi-platform project, you can use that across all your platform, including Android. For room, well, there's no room, but there's SQLDelite, which is DSL for SQL databases that is done by the folks at Square. It's really nice. It actually supports not just SQLite, but also other databases such as MySQL, Postgres and maybe something else I don't remember off the top of my head. You cannot use Hilt, but you can use Dagger. There's a bit more things to take care of when you use Dagger directly instead of Hilt, obviously, but it works. It's the same basic idea, so it shouldn't be too foreign to anyone. You cannot use Timber, but you can use Arbor, which is essentially the same API, but on a Kotlin multi-platform library. Again, you kind of see the trend here where you can use the same thing across all the supported platforms, which is nice. And, well, the bad news is there is currently no image loading library that works on Compose for Desktop. Maybe someone here will write it. I hope so, because I don't have time. For what concerns view models instead, you kind of don't need something just as badly as you need it on Android that is specifically done for that to survive orientation changes. There's no orientation changes. There's no configuration changes. So you can technically just hold something in memory as a singleton, and that can be done by Dagger, or you might want to do it by hand, or you can use a library like Instance Keeper from the S&T library, which is from the same person that has written Decompose. That is also, if I'm not mistaken, a Kotlin multi-platform library. Not really the same as vModels, though. Theming. This is a big one. So theming, well, you can use Material. That's fine. Material works. It looks good. Perfect. Eventually, I guess Material U will also be supported, although I'm not sure what that will actually look like on a desktop where you don't have the integration with the rest of the operating system. I honestly have no idea. But there's a problem, which is Material is not always great on desktop. There are some things, like it's optimized for touch devices. And you have huge touch targets because it's made for fat fingers to press on screens. But with a mouse, you can have a fat finger, but on the mouse, and you can still pick the individual pixel with the mouse most of the time. So that's not needed. It's a kind of a waste of space sometimes. There is no official UI framework or theme that you can use on desktop that just works for you. So you kind of had to deal with Material or rolling your own thing. There is, though, some library that is called Aurora by Kirill Gruchnikov, and that is a third-party theme for Compose for Desktop. And it looks like a desktop app, although maybe from the early 2000s. It still does. You have all the things that you would expect to have in a desktop application. You have skinning support, again, early 2000s. But it looks nice. It works reasonably well, and it's being actively developed by Kirill, which is fairly cool. So it's time to ship something, right? Let's ship an application with Compose for Desktop. How does that work? There are obviously Gradle tasks that you can use to build the installers that I mentioned earlier. Every operating system will have its own output because Windows likes its own thing, macOS very much like its own thing, and Linux likes its own things. macOS is more different than the other ones because, as usual, in particular, on macOS, you have to deal with notarization, which is something that I mentioned earlier. Notarization, in particular, means that you have to go to Apple and tell them, hey, here's my app. Do you like it? And they will sign it for you. And that will make sure that when you run the application on Mac, you don't get an annoying window that says, you shouldn't run this app. So gatekeeper, happy, users, happy. There is a very comprehensive guide on the Compose for Desktop repository that guides you through the whole process, even if you have never done it. So it's not too hard. It's just a bit of a faff. It is important to mark that this is only required if you plan on distributing your application to other users. If you're just running something locally, doesn't matter. It's fine. It's an application, click play, it pops up. Another thing that maybe you haven't thought about is that, well, there isn't Play Store. There isn't an Amazon App Store. There isn't a Samsung, whatever the name is, I forgot. So you don't get things like automatic updates. You don't things like built-in licensing to make sure that people don't pirate your app. And you don't get in-app billing. There are some Java libraries out there that you can use to implement some of those functionalities. For example, for updates, there's a library called Update4J, just the first one that I found on Google when I was searching for how to do that. And that will work for you. But obviously, you don't get it for free. You have to implement that. You might be able, though, to say, oh, wait, my desktop OS has a store. I can put stuff there. Yes, you might be able to. I don't know if it works, but you can try. I think it shouldn't be a problem on Windows, most likely, although I will expect that Apple will make your life a bit harder because maybe they don't like runtimes being bundled with applications as much. So I don't know. I haven't tried. I read the terms of service, and it seems like it might not be allowed, but I haven't tried again. In conclusion, I want to point out, once again, the nice thing about Compose at this point is that you can use it across platforms. You can use the power of Kotlin multi-platform to have an application that shares a lot, if not all, of the business logic between platforms. And you can share, to a degree, the UI code as well now, thanks to Compose, because at least between Android and desktop, they're very similar. They will have a lot of things in common. Probably you still want to have a specific UX for some things that is different across operating systems, but that should be relatively easy to do. Web, though, is an entirely different beast, and I don't think you can share anything between desktop and Android and web, because it uses the HTML DOM. But there are also other things that you can use Compose for. For example, you can check out Mosaic, which is an implementation of Compose to drive a command line interface. So you can use composables to write things on the command line, which is pretty cool. The repository is linked in the website, as usual. So yeah, go out, try it, see how it works for you, do something. Let me know you've done something. There will be bugs, report the bugs, they will fix them. Do you miss anything? Open a feature request. They will eventually do that, probably, unless you're asking for something that makes no sense. But most importantly, go out, have fun, play with it. It's better than anything else you can do on desktop. Trust me, I've tried. Go and have fun. And with that, do you have any questions? Yes, there's a microphone there.
Awesome, thanks for the presentation, really insightful. So I have a question maybe from the other side of the, let's say, cross-platform things. So I'm a Flutter developer, and I'm using Flutter for desktop. And it's cool to see that the Jetpack is in almost the same place as Flutter was in terms of desktop support, like 1 year ago, 2 years ago. And I wonder, have you tried? And what do you feel about like comparing the Jetpack Compose and Flutter? And also, how does the tool chain for Jetpack Compose looks like on the macOS, let's say? How much work do you need to do, like in practice, in order to make the app running? Like, do you have like a full support? You just like call like build or whatever, or do you need to like make a bunch of scripts to make it work?
I'll go in reverse order so that if I forget what you started from, just remind me. So in terms of macOS, you use Gradle. You don't need to do manual things. The only manual annoying thing to do is notarization. but there is really not much you can do about it. I think the Gradle task, there is a Gradle task to deal with that will automate part of it if you configure it. You don't need to create custom scripts. You don't need to do weird things. It should just work. The first part of the question was about the comparison with Flutter, right? So I haven't used Flutter on the desktop, so I don't know. I'm afraid I don't know. Sorry? Oh, yeah, sure. OK, let's make a deal. Sure. Yeah, I have used Flutter in the past. I haven't used it in a while. I know it has come a long way. But I'm more living in the Kotlin ecosystem right now, so I am not entirely sure. I guess that Flutter on desktop has kind of the same, I don't want to say problems, but the same things that, yeah, the same things where you have idioms that are only for mobile and things that are only for desktop, and then they will have probably similar solutions. I'm not sure that, maybe we can talk about this later. Sure.
Hi, thanks. Do you know any companies that are building Kotlin multi-platform, and maybe why?
So
any?
You mean applications using
yeah.
Compose in Kotlin multi-platform?
Yes.
I don't know. I would assume, but honestly, I don't know that. I'm sorry.
Does JetBrains use any?
I think Toolbox is JVM only. I don't think it, because it doesn't really make sense to do web for Toolbox. I'm sure someone internally is using that. I mean, the Compose team for sure is dogfooding that to themselves, but I don't know. And the web part is fairly recent, and it's still in its infancy. So there's a lot to that that still needs to be done. So I wouldn't be surprised if adoption is still in the very early stages for that.
Okay, thanks.
No more questions? Cool. Thank you, everyone. And stay here for their talk.